If it is false, then for the good of society, and especially for the good of the poor people who have fallen prey to this confusion, transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely.
So this is Michael Knowles. If you're unfamiliar, he is one of the Daily Wire hosts. He seems to boost his level of notoriety, his level of fame, by saying really inflammatory stuff. Matt Walsh, another Daily Wire host, says the same inflammatory things, has the same tactic. It's popular to attack the trans community at the moment, so that's who they're attacking. But rest assured, the trans community was not their first target. These people targeted tons and tons and tons of different people before settling on the trans movement, because that's what gained eyeballs the most. Now, the reason that I play this clip, I mean, it's a little bit older. It came out March 2023. The reason I play it is because there's this list called The 10 Stages of Genocide that's been written up and published by the Holocaust Museum, I believe. The Holocaust Memorial Day Trust is who it is, actually. So I wanted to go through the 10 stages and just kind of talk about it. What can we expect from a genocide? For the record, this is the Holocaust is by no stretch of the imagination the only instance of a genocide in even recent human history. We have a number of different examples. Rwanda is one. Bosnia. There are at least 5 examples of it, I believe. There's a set definition of genocide, like what you can expect to be called a genocide. For example, one thing that's considered such is if you're forcefully sterilizing an ethnicity, that's also considered a genocide. Like what's happening to the Uyghur Muslims in China right now, that's legally considered a genocide. There's also something called a cultural genocide. God, I'm saying that word so many times, YouTube is going to censor me. But anyway, there's something called a cultural genocide where the government will take children away from people of that ethnicity and put them with parents of the other ethnicity. This happened in Canada, where indigenous people had their children taken away and given to white parents. That's why it's illegal in the United States, as affirmed by a recent Supreme Court decision, that it's illegal to place a black child with a white family under certain conditions, or place an indigenous child with a white child. It just depends on the situation, but the state is very picky and careful about that, rightfully so. So let's give this list a read, and we'll hit a couple of points as we go down. So number 1, classification. The differences between people are not respected. There's a division of us and them, which can be carried out using stereotypes or excluding people who are perceived to be different. Now, this one may stick out to you because the video that I just played with Michael Knowles was very us and them heavy, right? It was all about how this group of people is evil and they are causing problems, but we have the moral position.
It is all or nothing. If transgenderism is true, if men really can become women, then it's true for everybody of all ages. If transgenderism is false, as it is, if men really can't become women, as they cannot, then it's false for everybody too. And if it's false, then we should not indulge it, especially since that indulgence requires taking away the rights and customs of so many people.
He's positioning himself in an oppositional position to anybody to the left of hunting the homeless for sport at this point. He's positioning himself against the trans community. There's a reason his face looks so funny, and it basically boils down to video does that. That's just how video works, but, you know, we'll save that explanation for another day. So the point here is that they've been, when I say they, I'm talking about the right, the far right, specifically people at the Daily Wire. Michael Knowles, Matt Walsh, Ben Shapiro, people like that. Those people that I just listed have been engaging in classification for a while now. Number 2, symbolization. This is a visual manifestation of hatred. Jews in Nazi Europe were forced to wear yellow stars to show that they were different. Number 3, discrimination. The dominant group denies civil rights or even citizenship to identified groups. The 1935 Nuremberg laws stripped Jews of their German citizenship, made it illegal for them to do many jobs or marry non-German Jews. Or marry German non-Jews. Yeah, we've seen a ton of examples. Do I even need to list any? I should probably list some examples of this. right here, I mean, I don't even need to pull up another example. Michael Knowles was calling for the removal of the rights of an entire demographic of people. He was calling for transgenderism to come to an end. If that's not like calling for the removal of rights, I don't know what is. There are a billion examples of it in modern media right now. Here's another: dehumanization. Those perceived as different are treated with no form of human rights or personal dignity. During the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, Tutsis were referred to as cockroaches. The Nazis referred to Jews as vermin. Yeah, I don't know if you guys know much about the Rwandan genocide, but let me just give a little context to it. There are 2 tribes in Rwanda. This is in Africa. So, yeah, right here, if you're looking at Africa, it's got a little, dotted line around it. You just kind of zoom in at this point. It's above Burundi, if that gives you any context. Now, in all seriousness, it's next to Tanzania and below Uganda and next to Kenya. Lake Victoria, apparently, is right there. Interesting. I wonder who named the lake, right? Do you think it was the Africans or the Europeans? One will never know who named this lake. Anyways, the Rwandan people are made up of 2 different groups, right? There's the Hutu and the Tutsi. And in 95, they were kind of at each other's throats, for lack of a better term. When the British came to colonize Rwanda, they found the Tutsi people, which, by the way, Tutsi and Hutu are almost, identical. For all intents and purposes, they are identical. But the British separated them into basically tall and short, or slightly lighter skin and slightly darker skin, because the tall and slightly lighter skinned ones looked more like British people, like noblemen, like Europeans. So the Tutsis, who it was, the taller and slightly lighter skinned people, were given positions of authority in government. They were allowed to have government jobs and be police and run blah, 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 all that stuff. So the Hutu were the oppressed group, 90% Hutu, I believe, and 10% Tutsi, somewhere in that vicinity. Okay, the Tutsi in 1994, before the attack happened, the Tutsi were 14%. The Twa was another tribe, which was unconnected to any of the fighting, really. The Twa was 1%, and then the Hutu made up 85% of the population, right? I had to look it up for 1995 because those demographics changed after that, unfortunately. So the Hutu were kind of sick of the Tutsi being in charge and started attacking them, calling them cockroaches, as the Holocaust document thing here says, as the 10 stages to a genocide says. They were calling them cockroaches, just like Nazis referred to Jews as vermin on radio shows and stuff, until one day, the president of Rwanda, which I believe was a Tutsi, his plane was shot down in 95, and that was kind of the signal. Shortly after that, the Hutu people got on a radio show and said, it's time to cut the tall trees. That was the call. That was the signal. As you'll see in a second, in the very next point, organization, genocides are always planned. Regimes of hatred often train those who go on to carry out the destruction of people. The Hutu were prepared for this. They knew what was going to happen next. Unfortunately for everybody in the mix here, when Britain colonized the Rwandan area and put Tutsis in charge of things, they put notes on their licenses and stuff, what tribe they were from. So it was a matter of getting into this government building to find the list of all Tutsi people registered in the entire country. You can find this one in number 8. Persecution. Victims are identified because of their ethnicity or religion, and death lists are drawn up. We'll go in order. I just want to point out that every step of the way, it followed this exact chart. So after they broke in and got the list, they were going house to house, door to door, the Hutu were, with machetes. Bullets were so scarce in the area that if you were a Tutsi and you preferred, instead of a machete, you could buy a bullet from somebody, from the person that's attacking you. You could buy a bullet and they would use it on you instead of the machete. Door to door. There's famously a Hutu Catholic, I think it was Catholic, or a religious guy anyways. There's a famous Hutu religious leader, a pastor, who told the Tutsi in the area that he was going to protect them. They need to get into his church and he'll hide them. And when they all went into the church, the Hutu that were in charge of organization, number 5 on the list, I think they just lit the church on fire, waited for them to run out, and picked them off as they came out. Again, this same thing happened in Germany. Like, this is the standard pathway to genocide. This is what you can expect. So when you see things popping up on this list in popular culture, it should raise some red flags, right? It should concern you. There's another guy called John Zmirak. He's a religious nutcase. And he talked about the Rwanda situation. Let me just play this. Check this out. For the record, if you are on my main channel, we're going through Heaven's Gate initiation tapes right now on my Unfiltered channel. Go check it out. It's fascinating, in my opinion, and it's valuable to understand how people got to where they are. We're going through it beginning to end. Heaven's Gate initiation tape.
They choose to still hurt. They could actually say, "Thank you, God, for the lesson."
And of course, he believes himself to be Jesus. So anyways, yeah, check it out. It's kind of interesting, in my opinion. Anyways, back to what I was saying. John Zmirak. Listen to this guy. He's an evangelical nutcase. This came out mid-September 2022. Just check out what he says here.
When the Nazis attacked Jewish stores and got away with it, that told people persecution, real genocidal persecution, is down the road. Right now in America, our government and the leftist institutions that support it, from the Ivy League to large numbers of churches, to the mainstream of the Republican Party, which supports it by being afraid to fight it, it's reminding me of the buildup in the 1990s in Rwanda, the buildup.
So Christians, in his mind, white Christian evangelicals, are being treated like the Tutsi were being treated in Rwanda. How, disgusting is this for this guy to say? By the way, I'm not done with the Rwanda story. There's more to it.
The build-up towards genocide. The Hutus were the majority, but they weren't as wealthy or successful as the minority.
Well, that's not even the right word. They weren't allowed in positions of authority. That's really the correct way of saying it. It wasn't that they weren't as wealthy or successful as the Tutsi. They were systemically oppressed. They were prevented from accessing the higher levels of success by being barred from being in government or higher up positions in bigger companies and stuff like that. But, he's trying to compare the plight of the Tutsis to Christian evangelicals' plight. That is apparently 100% totally real and not fictitious.
Majority, but they weren't as wealthy or successful as the minority Tutsis. So they resented them. They wanted their stuff.
Wasn't about that. It was that they recognized that there's a systemic bias, a systemic injustice happening, and they set out to make it right, or try to make it right. But as we learned, genocides always have an element of organization. So there were extremists in the demographic of Hutu who were planning to attack the Tutsi. What happened to the Tutsi, no matter what, was unacceptable and evil. He's comparing the Tutsi to himself as one of these oppressed minorities, apparently. Just absurd.
Minority Tutsis. So they resented them.
It's Tutsi, not Tutsi. That's a movie with Tom Hanks, isn't it? I'm sorry, Dustin Hoffman, my mistake. Yeah, that's a movie with Dustin Hoffman, not a tribe in Rwanda, but okay.
But they weren't as wealthy or successful as the minority Tutsis. So they resented them. They wanted their stuff. They wanted their power. They wanted their money.
That's not what it was about, really, but okay.
And they started demonizing the Tutsis, calling them cockroaches on radio shows.
That's correct.
News hosts would refer to Tutsi cockroaches.
That's accurate, absolutely. And as I said before, eventually it came to a fever pitch when the president died and the Hutu radio people got on the air and said, time to cut the tall trees.
The way I see people talking about white people, about Christians, about so-called Christian nationalists, they talk about us the same way.
Who? Who's talking about Christian nationalists like they're cockroaches who need to be snuffed out? That's insane. There's no large movement that is trying to enact a genocide against Christian evangelicals. But you know who is trying to enact a genocide?
Transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely.
Strong language. Strong language from somebody who's oppressed by this minority group, right? Trans people are oppressing Michael Knowles, right? Is that what it is? They live in a fantasy land where they are the oppressed minority. Insane. So anyways, yeah, let's keep reading this list because, like I said, there's more to the Rwandan story here that I haven't touched on yet. So we've covered dehumanization. We've covered organization, which is number 5. Here's polarization. Propaganda begins to spread by hate groups. The Nazis used the newspaper Der Stürmer to spread and incite messages of hate about Jewish people. Any of this sounding familiar? It doesn't have to be newspapers now. We have social media. It can be any number of large content creators spreading propaganda. Far-right podcasters and content creators and newspapers and whatever have to portray themselves as the persecuted minority as they actually call for the death of trans people. That way they can keep eyes off of them. They can distract. Oh, we're the persecuted ones. This is Lauren Witzke. She ran for public office in 2020 as a Republican and lost. But she did the whole Trump method of saying that she really won and it was just cheated away from her, right? Well, listen to this. This is late January 2023.
We are the most persecuted people in America. I have never in my life felt so persecuted as a white person. I've never been so scared to have white children in the future because I'm like, this is only going to get worse. And not a single politician will say the word, this is anti-white.
Because you live in a fantasy land. You are not persecuted. There's not an anti-white movement out there. I mean, seriously, if there was, I would be the first to identify it. Really. I don't want a genocide, no matter what. No matter who's being attacked. It doesn't matter. I don't want anybody hurt. Nobody. Life is the most precious thing in the universe. The most valuable thing in existence. I don't want anybody to be hurt. That includes Donald Trump. I don't wish death on anybody. Not one person, okay? But this isn't happening to them. This is not a problem. White, evangelical, conservative, blah, 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 are not being attacked. They're not being even demonized. These people are literally trying to take over the United States. And they have organization. They know the plan. You know what the plan is to take over the U.S.? For people in Lauren Witzke's camp, people that know her, the plan is Seven Mountains Dominionism. It's a Christian nationalist ideology that was actually taken straight from anti-Jewish propaganda. The claim is that Jews were doing it all the way back in the 1930s and the 40s in Nazi Germany. And he took that plan straight from Nazi Germany and is implementing it in America today. Listen to this. This guy knows Trump, by the way. He's been in closed-door meetings with him a few times. This is from early March 2022.
3% of the population, roughly 3 to 4% of the population, are radical leftist elites. 30% of the population are evangelical born-again Christians that are inclined to go towards Pentecostal language. I mean, we're really out there.
Yeah, these numbers are not accurate. I don't even know what he's talking about, but okay.
30% against 3%, but they neutralize the church because...
He's giving us the 7 mountains now. These are the 7 areas of society that he wants to take control of so that instead of having to go door to door and proselytize, he could just force people to be Christian or to go to church or whatever. A little while of that, and your entire country will be made up of Christians, or they'll leave.
But they neutralize the church because they're also in religion. They changed the definition of marriage, so they've taken over family. They've totally taken over academia, so the education institutions are teaching leftist theology or leftist ideology and silencing conservatives.
This isn't happening. He lives in a fantasy where he's the persecuted one. Honestly, I think he knows. This is it's hard to know which people know the truth, know that they're full of it, and which people have just been brainwashed by the people around them. In my opinion, there's no way to really know for sure. I think Lance Wallnau knows that he's full of it when he says things like this. This is something called DARVO. Deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. It's an abuse tactic. You say, I'm not doing it, you're doing it. Attack the other person and claim that they're the perpetrator. DARVO. Look it up, really. Abuse victims probably already know about it if they've been to therapy about this stuff. I'm sorry. Abuse survivors. That's actually the correct term. Not victims, but survivors. Like myself. Let's keep listening here. He's listing the 7 mountains, right? So he said church, family, marriage.
Neutralize the church because they're also in religion. They changed the definition of marriage.
Right. So we've got church, marriage, and family, right?
Taken over academia, so the education institutions are teaching leftist theology.
Just complete nonsense. This is not happening. But so the other one is education. These are the areas in society that they want to take over and impose their Christian beliefs upon.
Or leftist ideology and silencing conservatives. They're controlling government right now. They've taken over legacy media, Hollywood, entertainment, and arts, and now they've got Wall Street.
So he just listed them. I don't know all of it. I don't remember what he just listed, but we'll just go through a few. Arts, media, education, economy, military, government. I mean, all of this stuff is stuff that he intends to take over, that he intends to get his people to the top of, so that he can impose his beliefs upon the people in the country.
This is 3%. 30% of the population is Christian.
Again, don't believe any of these statistics.
How is it that 30% are dominated by 3%? They have a worldview for bringing their kingdom here now. We're told to pray thy kingdom come.
You're hearing this, right? DARVO. Deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. Is it just me? It's so blatantly obvious what he's doing right now, right? But when you have cognitive dissonance, when you refuse to accept that you could be in the wrong, maybe, you will listen to anybody who's willing to tell you what you want to hear about society. It's their fault, not your fault. It's their fault. Us and them. Again, remember in the stages of genocide, us and them? He's been using the word us and they a lot, hasn't he?
Come, but we put it off to the second coming.
There it is.
We put it off. They are organized, and we are not.
They and we.
So, God says, I'm going to send you a revival. And we're praying for revival. And as we pray for revival, we think, well, watch what happens. That 30 will become 50%. It doesn't matter, because the guards in the prison control what goes on with the inmates. You could have 75%. And if they control those high places, you still are in suppression, because that's the story of history.
Right. White people being oppressed. 100%. Story of history. So his point is he wants to take over these 7 areas of society and impose his religious beliefs upon everybody around him. I mean, any of this sounding familiar? So that was number 6, polarization. Propaganda begins to spread by hate groups. The Nazis used the newspaper Der Stürmer to spread and incite messages of hate about Jewish people. Number 7, preparation. Perpetrators plan the genocide. They often use euphemisms such as Nazis' phrase, the final solution, to cloak their intentions. They create fear of the victim group. Building up armies and weapons. Any of this sounding familiar? Seriously, building up armies and weapons? You ever heard of the Black Robe Regiment? This guy is David Barton, and he is the head of one of Donald Trump's super PACs. And he's come up with a ton of propaganda for Christians to use against non-Christians. He is an evangelical propagandist who's come up with nearly all of the arguments.
The greatest people killer of all has been government. Nothing has killed more people than government has killed. And so when you look at that, the Founding Fathers believed...
Well, you know, not for nothing, I think guns have killed more people than government, right? If we're talking about non-corporeal things like government, then I guess we would say guns has killed more.
The Founding Fathers believed that the people should be able to have enough arms in place to be able to remind their government, you don't want to mess with us.
Yeah, so he likes to rewrite history. And this is a video of him saying that people should be allowed to own nuclear weapons. I'm not joking. That's why his argument falls apart, because the Founding Fathers didn't foresee nuclear weapons existing. even if this was true about them, which I'm not even sure it was.
I don't care if he has one, because he should have the same rights. But you're saying, well, I don't think private citizens should have nuclear weapons. But if you've been trained with responsibility and morality and the concept of when and where you use them, the Founding Fathers are trained extensively in the concept of defensive warfare. You don't start anything. Now, if somebody else starts it, you can take it on.
So you picking up what he's putting down here? He's saying everybody having nuclear weapons would be fine because in this fictional world that he sees happening at some point in his life, everybody is trained with morality, i.e. they're all Christians. So if everybody's a Christian, we just kill all the non-Christians, then all we have is people who are allowed and safe to have nuclear weapons. Here's the point. The guy, David Barton here, has been talking about something called the Black Robe Regiment for a while. Now, if you haven't heard of this, the idea here is Black Robe Regiment was a set of pastors back in the mid-1700s who were preaching to their congregations about breaking off from Britain and creating their own constitution, basically. They were in favor of the Revolutionary War, and they were preaching to their congregation about it and militarizing their congregations, training them to use weapons and stuff, giving them guns, and turning them into small militias. That's the Black Robe Regiment. Well, come to find out, David Barton made that term up. That is not real. It's fabricated completely. Black Robe Regiment didn't even appear in literature until he wrote a book in the 90s. Fascinating, right? So that's really what this is all about. That's what it's always been about. Militarizing churches. The Black Robe Regiment. That's practically all the guy talks about. So this preparation bit, number 7, perpetrators plan it. They often use euphemisms like the phrase final solution to cloak their intentions. They create fear of the victim group, building up armies and weapons. Does that sound familiar? This dude is literally creating armies out of churches. Single sleeper cells. Here's number 8, persecution. Victims are identified because of their ethnicity or religion, and death lists are drawn up. People are sometimes segregated into ghettos, deported, or starved, as property is often expropriated. Genocidal massacres begin. That's basically the final stage, practically, before things happen, or as things are happening. You notice the bit here about death lists being drawn up. The Hutu, like I said, in 95, they didn't have to draw up a list. The British did it for them by putting everybody's tribe on their driver's license. That's why people are generally afraid of lists of any kind, of listing that they're trans on any documentation of any sort. They don't want documentation of this because it's irrelevant to their lives, to anything. Why would you ever need to know if they're trans, aside from the doctor maybe? A school would never need to know that about you. Like the police department would never need to know it. But it creates an easy in for getting a list. And if you think they wouldn't go for the list, think again. This made headline news when it happened. The Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton, sought state data on trans Texans. This is the Washington Post. There are a bunch of examples. The Texas Tribune talked about it too. Employees at the Texas Department of Public Safety in June received a sweeping request from Republican Attorney General Ken Paxton's office. Compile a list of individuals who changed their gender on their Texas driver's license and their department records during the past 2 years. Why? Why did he need that list? There was no legitimate reason for it. He didn't even give us a reason. There's concerning stuff happening in Tennessee right now, too. Parents of trans children feel betrayed by Vanderbilt Hospital because Vanderbilt Hospital, they notified patients over the weekend, including parents of trans children, that have provided medical records to the state attorney general as part of a civil investigation into the hospital's billing practices involving transgender care. They turned over a list of trans people. So lists are happening right now. We're at the list stage. This is number 8. We're there. All of these things have happened. Everything on this list. I don't know about the organization bit. I haven't actually seen a full organized plan for genocide, but I've heard an awful lot of people talking about it. You know somebody has drawn up plans for this. When you get people out here saying things like Christian nationalist Tony Perkins said,
we should be, happy warriors. We were created for this. It wasn't like this is just something that happens to fall upon us at this moment. Yeah. We were created to be warriors for Christ, especially as men. We're to lead our families as warriors. Now, that terminology has been maligned by the culture that we're, these, Christian warriors from a standpoint of we're trying to take over the world. Yeah, we are. The kingdom.
Yeah.
That doesn't make it better. You think that makes it better? So this guy's actually also Seven Mountains Dominionist in large parties, an evangelical extremist. Or how about this one? This is Gene Bailey on the TV show Flashpoint, operated by Kenneth Copeland, owned and operated.
All right, I want to say one more time, you guys need to be involved in Flashpoint. You need to get on the email list. Go sign up at govictory.com/FP sign up. Be a part of the Army. You say, well, what is the Army? It sounds like a militant group. We are exactly that. We are militant. We're not picking up arms and storming the Capitol yet, but we are standing up and saying we are going to do everything within the legal bounds of our authority as American citizens.
Just disturbing. We are an army is what he's laying down for us right now. We are an army. We are militant. Wait, somebody says, I'm sorry. Thank you, Fennec the Rabbit. I think. Thank you so much for clarifying. This is on CNN. Vanderbilt Transgender Health Clinic suspends gender-affirming surgery for minors. And parents of trans children feel betrayed by Vanderbilt Hospital because Vanderbilt Hospital, University Medical Center is what it is. So a hospital. They notified patients over the weekend, including parents of trans children, that have provided medical records to the state attorney general as part of a civil investigation into the hospital's billing practices involving transgender care. They turned over a list of trans people. We are there. Okay, we're there. We are at, wait, which one is it? Number 8. We're at number 8. Here's number 9. Extermination. The hate group attacks their identified victims in a deliberate and systematic campaign of violence. Millions of lives have been destroyed or changed beyond recognition through the genocide. What about that? Does that sound familiar to you?
Transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely.
I'm sorry, eradicated, not exterminated. Different words, right? And then finally, number 10, we land on denial. The perpetrators or later generations deny the existence of any crime. So let me finish the story about the Rwandan attack. A group of Tutsis got out of the country, organized into a militia, and swept through the country as an armed militia group. You know the name of that group? The Rwandan Patriots Front. Kind of interesting to hear the name Patriot Front when there's actually a group in the United States, a white nationalist extremist group, that calls themselves Patriot Front. You guys remember that Charlottesville Nazi rally back forever ago when Trump was president, I believe? This Nazi rally that took place where Heather Heyer died. The attendees of that rally were called, I think, Patriot Vanguard was the name of it. I forget exactly what the name was, but the Texas chapter of that Vanguard group was none other than this guy right here. Thomas Rousseau is his name. Shortly after that Charlottesville rally took place with the full-blown Nazis there, he did a hostile takeover of the group. He changed the passwords to everything and kicked the leader out of all of their Telegram channels and Discord and every communication method they had, and renamed the group Patriot Front. Sounds an awful lot like Rwandan Patriot Front, doesn't it? So after all of that, the Tutsi swept through the country and enforced order upon everything. They ended the attack. Sadly, I believe that the attack went on for 100 days straight, and not one country came out and said something about it. Not one country called for a change. Not one country said, this is wrong, stop it, and stepped in, intervened. Anything. The British people that colonized the country in the first place left, waited for this to happen, knew it was coming, saw the signs. When they heard the saying, cut the tall trees, they knew. You got to speak up when you see this stuff. Right now, these steps are happening. Every one of them, except all the way up to step number 9, extermination. The hate group attacks their identified victims. We haven't hit that yet. There are stochastic events where lone wolves come in and attack people. That's happened a lot, but there isn't an organized effort yet. I'm sure the plans are drawn up somewhere by somebody. Charlie Kirk, maybe? I don't know. Somebody. Ben Shapiro, Michael Knowles. Somebody's certainly drawn these plans up, I'm sure of it. But the plan has not been put into action yet. We cannot possibly take this too seriously. We need to watch what's happening because it is disturbing stuff for real. Anyway, let me know what you think about it in the comments. This stuff is just wrong, man. We can look to the past to see what we should do next, how we should stop it, and what signs to watch for to see if it's happening. Do not let this slip through your fingers.